Thank you for the question. The law itself contemplates that items are going to come up, and this is not a legislative item, as your president indicated. This is merely a response to last week's public, or 2 weeks ago's public comment. So the law contemplates that there might be items that might come up between the printing of the agenda and the day of the meeting, and items like this I don't think are violative at all of the open meeting law. And your agenda itself and takes the provision from the law and says there might be other items that come up on the agenda that are not contemplated.
Yes. As a further clarification, so there should be no discussion and no debates, and obviously we have no vote issue anyways, but that's all part of the process that makes this permissible.
I think it would be permissible to discuss it should you so choose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, members of the council, thank you very much for inviting us here. I just wanted to point out that the airport is extremely concerned about all environmental issues at the airport and surrounding the airport. And in the interest of brevity, I'd like to turn it over to Joe Longo to give a brief presentation on some of the things that we're doing at the airport.
Thank you, Bud. Again, Joe Longo. I'm an engineer, associate principal with the Horsley Witten Group, and I'll going to talk a little bit. I'll give a brief update of ongoing remediation we're conducting at the north ramp at the airport, Cape Air area, and as well as Upper Gate and Lewis Ponds. And the handouts have an extra slide. To keep it brief, I'm going to step to the third slide if you're following along. Ongoing hazardous materials compliance activities that we're conducting at the airport to comply with DEP and EPA regulations include quarterly sampling and laboratory analysis of monitoring wells on the north ramp to monitor contaminant concentrations and treatment system effectiveness. Continued operation and inspection of remedial systems that have been inspected by and have been operating in compliance with DEP. Semi-annual reporting to DEP, as well as forwarding those reports to Hyannis and Yarmouth water departments. And then regular inspections and inventories of all tenants for proper hazardous materials storage and handling. So basically, just to give you, and everybody pretty much knows the airport, but just to give you a lay of the land, you've got the airport with about 630 acres. There's what we're calling the north ramp, the Rectrix hangar, the Cape Air hangar, the discussed Upper Gate and Lewis Ponds Airport well number 1, water supply well, and the zone of contribution of its. The east ramp over here, the Steamship Authority parking lot, Yarmouth Road, and the Maher well field. And just quickly to go over what's assessment has occurred, for the most part, on the north ramp. Again, here's the Cape Air hangar, the north ramp. Basically, in the mid-90s, early 90s, it was discovered that floor drains were connected to leaching pits in the area in front of Cape Air, and historically contaminants like volatile organics and hydrocarbons had reached their way into soil and groundwater. What happened was, after the discovery of that, we completed assessment activities in that area, and in about 1995, starting then over the next 5 to 7 years, all these symbols are singular groundwater monitoring wells, and there are about 40 of them from Cape Air down towards the main terminal. So wells were installed, samples were taken, areas of contamination were delineated, and what we found was the groundwater had volatile organics again and hydrocarbons above groundwater drinking water standards, because it is a drinking water area. In response to that, remedial systems were installed again at the source area where these leaching pits were. It's this little, I guess, fuchsia line, if that's the color, as well as over here at an intermediate location and a down gradient location. The treatment systems, basically, you inject air into the ground through PVC, and it volatilizes or biodegrades contaminants, and it successfully reduced contaminant concentrations down gradient in these areas. Currently, there is an area right here delineated in yellow that shows contaminants above drinking water, slightly above drinking water standards. Source areas clean, down gradient areas are clean. Ongoing sampling is conducted in these wells, the furthest down gradient. To address this area, the airport has put on its CIP monies allocated for additional remedial systems to try and address that. Oh, and I should say that this intermediate fence is operational, and it is in containing this area of contamination from moving or migrating any further. The airport does have an EPA NIPDES permit to discharge stormwater from its runway system to several outfalls to Upper Gate and Lewis Ponds, delineated right there. As part of sampling conducted before the airport's DRI 2000, 2003, and 2004, samples were collected in both ponds. They're delineated with black triangles. Lab results showed elevated or levels of metals, hydrocarbons, and nutrients in the sediment. In 2007, as part of the DRI, additional sampling was conducted at these points again as well from sediment and the surface water. Results indicated sediment with the same contaminants at a little bit slightly lower concentration as previously, and nothing in the surface water. No contaminants in the surface water. But due to the presence of those contaminants, the next step in the process is conduct a stage 2 environmental assessment, which additional samples and lab results or lab analysis are conducted. And that's another item on the airport's CIP. Again, basically just to give you an idea of where we are, there again in the ponds we're discussing with their outfalls, the area that we're showing over here in yellow again is the area that's above drinking water standard. We're collecting down gradient samples here on the side of the airport. Again, groundwater moves this way from northeast down to southwest. So those wells, are sampled on a monthly basis from May to September and once in January. And since 1999, they've not shown any sign of contaminants, or they've been below drinking water standards. That is my basic summary of that. Again, they're between. I should point out they're between the airport and the Maher well field in question. I think that's it for me.
Mr. Di Lorenzo.
Yes, sir. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Di Lorenzo. I'm a deputy director with the Department of Environmental Protection. I work in the Bureau of Resource Protection. Bear with me if you already know how DEP is set up. 3 main bureaus. Resource protection, the resource is pretty much water. Wastewater, drinking water, wetlands, waterways. That's my bailiwick, or the group that I work with. Waste site cleanup deals with the mistakes of the past. And then there's a third BWP that does industrial interactions. Mark Ells asked me to stop by tonight because there's been some concern that the challenges with the contamination that were just referred to are impacting the drinking water wells. And I can tell you unequivocally that is not the case. You have a high-quality drinking water in Barnstable that we watch very closely, and you have met all parameters. In preparation for coming up here, I asked the staff out of the southeast region to run some water quality on the airport wells and the area wells, and they're all in very good shape. And the contaminants that seem to be of interest, PAHs, petroleum products, and lead, have been proven to be soil absorbers. They absorb to the soil. And I know that what I'm probably providing is just some reassurance. I mean, it's not specific to the airport, but your drinking water supplies are in very good shape. For credibility enhancement, I am a groundwater geologist. I'm a hydrogeologist. I spent 10, 15 years of my life chasing groundwater plumes, and in fact, these plumes I cut my teeth on at DEP. In fact, when we first, the question 4, way back when the legislature wanted us to hire people to identify all the waste sites in Massachusetts, that's when I got hired by DEP. And I worked on this project, so I'm responsible in some way for identifying all of these contamination sites. We did a lot of remediation, a lot of assessment. My job was to make sure that those things did not impact drinking water wells. That was up until 1997 I had that job. From then I went on to a series of management jobs. And since that time, Our drinking water folks have been working very closely with the wastewater, the waste site folks that are working in this area. We have no indication that the contaminants that you're talking about dealing with in the soils and the areas that you're concerned about are moving at all. Testament to that is the fact that they're not even in the surface water. They tend to not move. They don't pose a threat to the aquifer. They have to be dealt with. They are being dealt with. I had senior staff in the Southeast region get in touch with Hans people to see if everybody's in sync, and we ran the numbers, and since at least the last 2 years that I could see, everything's meets all drinking water standards. So if there's some specific question I can answer, I feel free.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?